You're listening to Podcasting for Experts with honest conversations about using podcasting as a tool to grow your reach, increase your audience, make a positive impact on the world, and most importantly, to get paid for your efforts. I'm your host, Jess, and we are Pristine Podcasts. Let's talk podcasting. Hey Sarah, thank you so much for agreeing to take the time to come on the podcast today. I always appreciate it when we haven't put out that many episodes yet, and it's always hard in the beginning to connect with people to interview. So thank you so much for finding some time for me today.
Yeah, I am really excited to be here. I love podcasting, and I know we had chatted a little before about just some high-level planning for it, and I love the conversation beforehand and the topics and what you've already put out. So I'm honored and excited to be a guest.
Yay, I can't wait. And it's a topic I've been interested in for some time, but I have to be careful with kind of like hyper focusing into it and spending all my days. And before I know it, I'm like an expert in something that doesn't really have any application to my life just then. But I always want to start first with the person's story, because I think there's so much to be gained from understanding how we ended up following a certain pathway. I read that you were working in advertising and marketing, and how did that lead to the Enneagram eventually? I know they're actually connected once you start looking into it, but it seems a bit of a change.
Well, that is a great question. It is a change. And even before sales and marketing, I actually used to work for a construction material company. So I was walking around like rock quarries, and I'm just going to own it. Like, I'm kind of girly. I would always get comments like, honey, are you lost looking for the mall? I mean, I had my boobs, but I still liked my pink. But so I was in environmental compliance for 5 years, which is like very data analytical. And the reason why I bring that up is because I will tie that into the Enneagram in just a moment. And then I completely changed. I just knew I didn't want to get better at keeping air emission logs. And so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And typically, those of your listeners who are in the sales world, most sales jobs, you don't have to have like a sales degree. It's just like, do you have the work ethic? Are you willing to try? Are you willing to be coachable? And so I was, and I got hired for this company and moved into a sales role in marketing and advertising for a health club publication or a health and fitness publication. And I learned so much about sales and standing out and branding and messaging. And actually, before I got into the Enneagram, I left that role. Again, we'll have a tie back to the Enneagram in just a moment. It was just not, there were so many great things about it. I learned so much. It was just not really fulfilling. I kept feeling like, I'm 10 years into my career at this point, and I still have not found my purpose. I still have not found meaningful work. And it just was starting to feel like hopeless, like I was standing still. I was circling the same cul-de-sac, not going anywhere. Meanwhile, I'm seeing people around me do great things. So I was like, I'm going to step out on my own. I'm going to take the chance. And the part that I really liked in my sales and marketing job was the social media part. So I started helping former clients, new clients, just kind of started advertising myself, marketing myself as a social media expert, marketing, especially for individuals who were starting their brands. And then what I noticed, Jess, was that, and maybe you've noticed this in your career too, because I know we have some overlaps, but I would sit down with somebody and we would come up with like the best strategy in the world. We would come up with 30 days of content. We would come up with a video strategy. We would come up with an offer. And yes, there were a lot of success stories, but still there were people who weren't able to hit publish, who weren't able to hit record, despite having literally everything they needed at their fingertips. And so I got to thinking, well, it's not just about the strategy. That's important, but there's something else that's missing. You hear mindset a lot, and there is something to that. And so it was, people had these stories that they were carrying around. You probably have heard this one, like people hate their voice, so they don't want to start a podcast. People don't like the way they write. They don't think they have anything good enough to share. They're afraid of what their Aunt Sally is going to say at Thanksgiving.
Aunt Sally is super common.
Yes, that Aunt Sally. So by diving into not just, yes, your strengths are important, but I really got interested in the Enneagram because it was such a light on self-awareness and showing you where those roadblocks were. Yes, strengths again, but also like, why do you keep having the same issues? And so for me, when I personally got into it and I was reflecting back on my former careers, the type that I ended up being really values like freedom and options and space and variety and big picture and visions. And it was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. Like why my work environment I used to feel suffocated in, or like why certain jobs just like weren't for me. And so by understanding that, I could kind of see like, okay, well, stop doing those things and try something else. And so it really is helpful in pairing that self-awareness with what is going to work for you, and then building a strategy based on that knowledge. So I know that was a long answer, but that's the gist of it.
No, I think it's very accurate. Like my background's very different. I mean, I tried like 8 jobs in the first year that I started working because I moved from Germany to the UK and I just needed something to pay the bills. I wasn't fussy, but I think in every single job for like a year, I walked out after less than a month. I just walked out. I was like, right, screw that. Like, I'm not doing that one more day. Like, this is ridiculous. And then I ended up in daycare and I was like, oh, actually, the small people are okay. I still don't love the adults so much, but I can deal with the children. Actually, they seem to be entertaining enough, So I did that for quite some time. And then I worked my way up and eventually I was the manager and I'm like, okay, so now I'm 24. I am the manager, top of the daycare chain. And what do I do now? And then I was like, I'm not going to do this for the next 50 years. Like, this is not going to be a thing. And there isn't really anywhere else to go. So that's when I started sort of looking around and I ended up online. And I was like, oh, what? There's people working on the internet. I'm like, are you joking? Yeah. I couldn't have figured that out sooner, that there's people doing this. And, they get to choose how they spend their time and what they do. I couldn't believe it. It was like this, like, I'm just having Aladdin play in my head going like a whole new world.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. And so many things that I used to hate, I now see why I wouldn't enjoy that at all. So I totally understand the long-winded answer, because all the examples were probably there all along. You would have seen it in every job, the things that you like and the things that you don't like and the things that come easy and the things that don't. So that may have been like super obvious.
And then there's that saying yes to that, because something else, just to piggyback off what you said, Jess, is that if you think about like even going back to school, like how long we have been studying and learning about other people, it's decades at this point for most of us. And if you think about how much time you take to learn and also study yourself, it's probably minimal, if at all. And so most people, it's like, well, I'm not happy, or this isn't what I want. But when you ask the question, well, what do you want? It's crickets. And I have been in that experience too, where it's like, gosh, I don't know. I know what I should want. And what I was going to say to all of that is that each of those jobs and in between those, I was trying to start a business here, and I probably started 12 businesses.
Oh yes. I made candles one time.
Yes.
It's very lovely. It was fun.
We might be the same Enneagram type. We'll have to talk about this later. It's that like nothing was like god awful. It was fine and it was good. And I think it's Jim Collins who wrote the book Good to Great. He said that the enemy of great isn't bad. It's actually good, because then you're just willing to like settle and stay in the status quo because it's too painful to go from good to great. But when you're in pain and when you're miserable, it's like, well, that's a much easier step to leave pain to try and get to great. But it's like, well, what if I fail? I'm already like in an okay spot. Like, why can't I just be happy? And that's where I was for a very long time, just I should be happy. I should want this job. I should want this salary. I should want this title. I should want this partner. I should want this life. And it was like, yeah, it's fine. I can't put my finger on why it's not great. And I was like, well, maybe it's life's just not supposed to be great. Maybe this is all that it is, but I do not believe that.
No, I don't, now that I've seen that so much more as possible. But I guess I would have believed that if I stayed where I was with the people that I've known basically forever, then I think, yeah, maybe I would have believed that. Maybe I would have, stuck it out. So what I was thinking is there's going to be people here who know what the Enneagram is. And then there's going to be people who are going, what?
You say that? Yeah.
Yeah, what was that? So shall we take a minute to explain first, and then before we get too detailed to kind of in the nitty-gritty, maybe a general overview, what are we even talking about? And then maybe we can give people some pointers as to, I don't know, this might be hard to say what type are you just from a few sentences, but they could definitely understand.
Yeah, start to narrow it down. And usually the process starts with what I'm definitely not. And then you can kind of go from there. So the Enneagram gets lumped into one of those personality tests, like Myers-Briggs or DISC or Strength Finder. And more corporations I'm seeing are using it as an assessment. But the thing that I love about it, and the thing that I think really makes it different is, well, really two things. One is that it's not so much your behavior. It's not your behavior that it's really looking at. Yes, there's common tendencies and common qualities of each of the 9 archetypes, but really what the Enneagram focuses on is the motive behind the action. And so you could have 5 people in a room who are doing the same thing, or on a team that do the same thing, that have the same job, or in your case, 5 people that want to start a podcast.
Oh yeah, but very different reasons to do
why?
So.
Yes. And so there is a core motive for each of the 9 types on the Enneagram. And then there's also a core fear that we are running away from. And one of the questions people ask is, what is that, nature, nurture? How does that develop? Enneagram theory says, for the most part, it is nurture. Something along the way happened, a thought, a situation just over time that kind of where we started to compensate and be able to feel safe or whatever we needed at that point. And so that kind of is how our type was formed in childhood. And that's why you don't want to necessarily try and type children, because they're still going through that process. And then that kind of leads us to that core motive, the thing that we're running towards, and also the thing that we're running away from. And then the second thing that I think is incredibly helpful with the Enneagram and makes it different, and that is that it is super fluid. Rather than getting 4 letters back with the Myers-Briggs or 5 strengths, and that's just kind of it. It's on a piece of paper, this is what you are. Yes, there are 9 types on the Enneagram, but within those 9 types, there's all different kinds of ways that one specific type can show up. You can be in a stress, you can be living your best life, you can be average, you can be growing, you could be just in a moment of a bad day and behave a different way than you would the next week when you're not so stressed out. But at the end, you're still going to have that same core motive. So your type isn't going to change, but we're complex human beings. So I love that it can be it is kind of complex as well. And, but that's okay, because so are we. And so we're different on different days and in different seasons of our life. And the Enneagram really helps kind of show you where you are in that moment of time, and then gives you a specific path for growth depending on what type you are.
That makes sense. So bouncing off of that, you've already answered my next question, which would have been the usual that you must get a lot, which is, does this change over the course of your life? Which I would assume is a question that lots of people will ask by default, because I guess I'll ask the next question and then I'll give my example. So the next question I have would be, is a test the best way to figure out what your Enneagram type is? Because I did one some time ago, years, and I don't remember the outcome of it, because I tend to go deep onto a subject and then I'll forget all about it. So I'd also tend to order the stuff to make the candles, do it once and then never do it again. So that's like a feature that I have for sure. So I did that test, but I for sure know that it wasn't the same outcome as this time, because like I redid it earlier because I thought like, oh, let me do it again, because I can't remember what it was. And the outcome wasn't the same because I'd never heard of this one before and I would have never considered it. But as I read it earlier, I thought, yeah, this does make sense. But that makes me wonder, I sometimes think, are those quick tests that you can do really an accurate assessment, or would you need to look at that in more detail, like looking at that core motive, looking at that core fear and kind of approaching it from that way? Would that be a more reliable way to get a more accurate outcome?
Yes, such a great question. So a quiz or a test can absolutely give you clues. And, most of us, we want the answer like right now. It's like, oh, we want to know what our 4 letters are. We want to know what our strengths are. And the Enneagram isn't like that because it is a self-identification process. So the results are only as good as you're willing to be honest about yourself. And as I mentioned kind of in the beginning, it does show the things that come easy to you, or just kind of validates that, brings that to light. But then it also shows you like the things that like sometimes you don't really want to know about yourself, or you don't want to admit about yourself. And so sometimes when people see the type that they are, they're like, oh my God, I don't want to be that type. So I usually say the type that you least want to be is most of the time the type that you are. But to find your type, you absolutely could take a quiz that would give you some clues. And then like you just said, Jess, the next step would be to pull out an article or an Enneagram book or listen to a podcast and start to understand what the core motive and the core fear is for your top 3 or 4. And then even within that, people still are like, well, I want all 4 of them are important, or, okay, well, there's these 2 now, and I just cannot. They are both very much important to me. They're both drivers in my life, which they will all be drivers. All 9 will be some sort of drivers. We have all 9 inside of us, but there is one dominant one. And so my next step for kind of that self-discovery process is to then learn about what is called your stress arrows and your growth arrows. And so would you be willing to share what type you came back as?
Yeah, so I came back as type 4.
Okay.
And
okay.
I did have I had maybe like 45 minutes or so. Like I legit have to stop myself with this kind of stuff. But yeah, I would agree with a large part of it, the good and the ugly. And I would definitely, I looked at the motivation and the fear and I thought, yeah, I would not like, feeling insignificant or anything like that. But I could also see how a few years ago, I would have not thought any of that to be accurate.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to know what your first results came back as, because sometimes when people get their results, their dominant type it's not necessarily the first or even the second one. Maybe it's the third or fourth. And the reason being, it just depends on kind of what they're going through. So for a 4, for example, you have a health number that goes to a type 1, meaning when you are like really taking care of yourself, especially like emotionally, you're going to take on some of those really healthy qualities of a type 1, which is known as the improver or the perfectionist. So you're adding structure to this free spirit that you typically are as a 4, and adding guardrails to your creativity to be able to get things done.
And my gut feeling is that I did test as a 1 before and that my boyfriend tested as a 9, but I don't quite remember. I'd have to dig it up and look into it.
Okay. I would be curious. Yeah. I would be curious what he came back as too. And by the way, one of the other questions is like, what are the most compatible types? And just talking about your husband, and I always say there's no compatible best types. It's just how healthy you are within your own type. So that it's anybody's wondering that question.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like your standard 10 questions, right? Like 10 questions that you're going to ask. And now it's like these 10 is going to be one of them.
Was it? Oh, well, we can talk more about that, but that came to mind. And then there's also a stress number where when you are stressed out, you will kind of max out the unhealthy qualities of a 4. So a 4 can get really kind of melancholy and really go within.
Moody, like, yes. Back off. I'm like, I've got like a warning sign on my head.
Yes.
And yeah, definitely. Yeah. I can see that part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And we will all do that. But then when that doesn't work, we then move our stress to our stress arrow. And so for a 4, that is type 2. And then we take on the unhealthy qualities of, in this case, the type 2. So they are called the helper, and they are very much focused on helping others and wanting to be wanted and loved. And so sometimes, and I'm not saying this is true for you, because it's
totally. I'm totally owning up to that. I'll be like, oh yeah, what can I do for you? So I don't have to look at my own shit that I've left lying around here. So if I can deal with yours, so let me take on those extra 5 clients just because, it keeps me busy. It's just like, that's what I mean. I don't think I would have noticed that that's what I'm doing. And that's why I was wondering if it's a case of the test isn't accurate, which is what people would always say, this test isn't accurate, or is it a case of I'm actually like BSing myself at this point because I'm totally not aware that that is actually what I'm doing. And I've shared this the other day actually, but I've had like not the bomb of the last 5 years kind of thing on the personal front. And I wonder if that's kind of made me more reflective. And then on top of that, we had like a year of staying at home to have lots of time to think unnecessarily much about stuff instead of going out to do things. So that didn't help after those bomb 2-3 years I had to start with. So maybe that's what I was thinking, just made me more, reflect on it, which may have gotten me to give more accurate answers in the first place. I don't know.
Yeah. Because sometimes we answer them at like what we would want to be. And something really interesting, especially for women to know and just to be cautious of when you are taking this, is that the type 2 that we just talked about, a lot of women, that's in their top 3 or 4, because that's what we feel like we should be. We should want to take care of others. And in reality, that's not ours. So that's just something to be aware of. Like, what do you feel like you should do versus like, what do you actually do or what do you actually want? And then the other one to be aware of is like on the complete flip side, which is the type 8. They're known as the challenger. They have the greatest energy of all of them. They have a lot of access to their anger, but they're also very passionate, very driven, high energy. And so for men, like that's one that like, who doesn't want to be a type 8, right? But a lot of women, that might be theirs, but they tend to not want to always own those answers, because then it's like, they're the bitch, right? They're not the leader. They're angry. And so it is interesting just kind of how like gender roles kind of show up even in this, with how we kind of identify, again, what is actually true versus like, what do we want to be true?
Very interesting. Yeah. I think so many experiences like add onto our pile of how we think we should be. Like I've grown up very differently to where I live now, and I am not the woman I should be. So if I was to try and adapt to the local standard, I am like a total failure. Like I pay a cleaner, how embarrassing. Like a woman that pays the cleaner must be like the laziest woman on the whole planet. It's just a different culture, and it adds to the should pile. And then, it's another thing to like make yourself feel bad about, because I should be doing this and this and this, and then not doing any of those things. And then we can't really be honest about ourselves.
Right. And then when we can't be honest with ourselves or about ourselves, it's like, then we're not able to be honest with the people that we really care about. And not that we're doing it intentionally, but just speaking for myself, it's like, if I don't know what's important to me and what I really want, but I'm get aggravated at my boyfriend, or he's annoying, or I'm getting really mad, and I just don't know why. And it's like, oh, it's because this thing, but like, let's be honest, it's not really that thing, but I just don't know why.
It's not the nail. Did you see that video where she's got the nail sticking in her head? She's like, it's not the nail. I'll share that in the show notes. But if anyone's not seen it, it's so funny, but that's me every single time. And it's always within me,
Yes.
It's not the thing. It's just like this whole other thing that I wasn't aware of.
Exactly. And so really, like, the kindest, really most effective way to have happier and healthier relationships is to start learning about yourself, so then you can communicate, I really like this. I really don't like this. This means a lot to me. And then kind of advocate for yourself, have boundaries, which, sometimes that's overused, but it is so true. And then that way it's like, oh my God, well, I appreciate knowing that about you. Or like, I appreciate knowing that like this means a lot to you and this other thing doesn't. And here I am doing this other thing and ignoring this other thing. So, it is just really interesting, but it all starts with like knowing ourselves. And you're right, Jess, that last year, just kind of being forced to stay in, I think a lot of people have started to like have these realizations, or start to like dive into, why do I have the same issue? Why do I feel this way? What's going on? And so it is kind of a cool time to be kind of learning about ourselves, and people are changing their minds on things and pivoting and making decisions because they've had that time to learn, study, reflect, make intentional change, not just be on default.
Yeah, I think the default mode is the one that just runs your life for like 15 years until you go like, hey, how did I get here? I really want to be here.
Yeah.
Hey, are you spending hours extra editing every other week because you forgot to do things like switching off your aircon or moving the dog outside of the house? Did you secure an amazing guest interview only to then forget to press record? Or maybe your guest forgot to press record and now you have to work with a really low quality backup recording? Do you want to batch your show and finally get ahead, but you can't for the life of you remember what's already done and what's not? Don't worry, this is really normal. There are way more steps involved in running a successful, high-quality podcast than meets the eye, and it's really easy to forget something here and there. But let's be realistic. If you really want to grow your show, you can't carry on like this. If you want to design a podcasting workflow that works, then grab our podcast workflow blueprint now. You'll get immediate access to our entire podcast workflow that we've been using with all of our clients for months. The blueprint contains a video training that explains exactly how our system works, the Trello board template that you can just plug into your account or transfer to your platform of choice, the fully customizable template episode workflows, guest email swipes, and as a bonus, the guest booking automation video training. You can check it all out and get your copy at pristinepodcast.com/blueprint. And now back to the episode.
So we just mentioned earlier in our little chat that we had that you were thinking about the 9 types as podcasters. I would really like to know, because that's potentially where our audience might recognize themselves. Were you mainly thinking about like the motivations that get people to do the podcast? I assume with what you've shared so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like why, like a motive or a strength that they're going to bring to their podcasting message. And then I have like one block that might be keeping them from starting or from kind of getting in their own way to growing.
Awesome. Will we be able to talk about those? I would love to know what you've got there.
Yeah, I will. I'll go through, let's see. I'm moving myself around. Here we go. I will go through them and then I'll just kind of stop for a minute and check in, make sure that this is okay. And then if you want to, we'll keep going through the rest of them.
Cool.
I will start with type 1. Our type 1 is known as the improver, also the perfectionist, and their kind of claim to fame on the Enneagram is that they have this, they are the change makers. They have a strong desire to improve things. And so they might want to start a podcast because they have this mission. They want to make something better. They are driven by a bigger mission than themselves, whether it's for the community, for a cause, for a specific group. And they're very ethical, and they are focused on the common good. So they're not always going to think like what's best for me. It's going to be what's best for those around me. And then they have this great attention to detail, and they will always focus on putting out high quality content. Now, the flip side of that, where they might trip themselves up, is that it can be too high quality. It's not.
I was going to say, I have these
ready.
people as clients. For some reason, I attract the clients to me, and a lot of them might be a type 1. Like, the message is huge, but yeah, sometimes the detail is what keeps them stuck, because they can't decide if the button should be green or orange, and that now becomes like a 2-week thing. And I'm like, can we just show this to somebody? No. Like, I don't know what color the button should be. And I'm like, okay, then we'll wait a little bit.
Yeah. And then it never gets published, or it's like 2 years later. So just something, again, to be aware that might be keeping you from taking action, moving on to your goal. Our type 2 is known as the helper, the caregiver. They also have a drive for the common good. They are driven, though, to help others and care for others, give value. They want to be valuable. Their ultimate goal is to be wanted and loved by others. And so they're always going to be looking for ways to share helpful content. The way that they can trip themselves up, if they are starting this podcast for business purposes or sharing content for business purposes, is that it's very easy for them to share value-based content, but anytime it comes to sharing their offer or why they're in business, they won't do it. It's harder for them. Our type 3 is known as the achiever, and their drive in life is to be seen as successful. They have this superpower for efficiency. So when it comes to the podcast process itself, they're going to be very efficient. They're going to have clear goals for their podcast. They're going to understand who's listening and what they need to hear. So they will have that part nailed down. Mm-hmm. Where they might get blocked is that they are so focused on that success and have a strong fear of failure that they might get down if their podcast episode doesn't get a certain amount of listens or downloads, or overall it's not where they wanted it to be, and feel like this isn't working, and then kind of jump ship and abandon the project altogether. Our type 4s are known as the individualist or the artist. This type they are the like creative geniuses of the Enneagram. They are deep, and on their podcast, you're probably going to find them having deep, meaningful conversations, uncensored, raw conversations. They are totally fine with sitting in uncomfortable emotions. The rest of the type tend to want to problem solve or look on the positive side and move the conversation like, oh, look on the glass is half full, but they are totally fine with sitting right there, which they also make amazing friends, because most of the time we don't want our problem solved. We just want someone to listen, and they're totally okay with like saying, yeah, this sucks. Like, tell me more. Let's think about it more.
I find that super frustrating when I am sharing something and all I wanted was the person to listen. And then I'm like, oh, like they got into problem solving mode.
They want to problem solve. Yeah.
I'm like, can't they just say like, oh yeah, that sucks. Like that would be enough. Like I can solve my own problems. I'm just like, I just wanted to like vent this thing. So now I have to like pre-phrase. We had to learn that in this house, but I have to pre-phrase everything with, can I just like, emotionally vomit at you for like 2 minutes and then I'm all good. It's okay. I'm just, so disclaimer.
That's so great that you say it. I mean, sometimes it's like, gosh, why do I have to say it? But I'm sure it probably has helped, because there is like, there's definitely a clash there between like just needing to listen and then somebody else just like feeling like they need to problem solve. So the type 4s are going to be able to really put out content and a podcast that have these episodes that really connect with their audience, and they feel like their audience probably feels like they know them because they're so open and willing to like get into vulnerable conversations. Where they might get tripped up is that their core driver in life is to feel unique and kind of special and do something that nobody's ever done before. And as you know, at this point in the world, there's really nothing that hasn't already been said or done. And so it's just a matter of putting your creative spin on it. So for the type 4s, the thing to be aware of is don't think that just because there's, 100 other podcasts about a topic that you want to dive into, it doesn't mean that there's not a way for you to still come into it and put your creative spin on it somehow. The type 5 is known as the observer, the expert. They are the ultimate thought leaders on the Enneagram. They will kind of, if you are a type 5, Jess, you might have a wing 5. So there's like, when you have your dominant type, sometimes people really resonate with one of the numbers on either side of them. And what's going to make me say this is this next thing is that when they learn about something, they want to go all in. They will just dive deep, 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 deep and become an expert on that topic. And so what you can count on a type 5 to know, or to kind of run a podcast, is that they are going to come to you with a lot of knowledge. It's going to be very well thought out. It's going to be accurate. There's going to be sources backed up by this information, and they're going to give you a deep dive into the subject. They're not just going to scratch the surface. They're going to go deep with you and want to share that with you. And it's going to bring them energy and joy to do that. Now, the thing that might trip up our type 5s is that feeling like they have to know everything before they can hit publish, before they can record the episode on this topic. And as you know, kind of it's similar to that type 1 perfectionist. You don't always have to know everything. It's just, you just maybe need to be a step or two ahead of the person or people that you're trying to help. So don't let that fear of like, need to know everything before I can hit publish stop you.
I think that's actually something where I want to say it's not just you can teach if you're just 1 or 2 steps ahead of someone. You are actually better at teaching if you're just 1 or 2 steps ahead of someone. So the best time to learn from me how to get started with setting up your online business tech was 4 years ago. Because 4 years ago, I was 2 years ahead of you, and I still exactly remember all of the things that I didn't understand back in the day, and I could explain it to you really easily. If you ask me now, I'm just going to be like, yeah, you just go here, you sign up for this, you connected to that, and I won't tell you the details because to me, it's like an everyday thing for 4 years, and I've forgotten how much I didn't know. So it's not just a permission thing, but it's actually you're probably better off sharing now than you would be if you waited 4 years. So if anyone's listening that's not sharing because they feel like they need to know everything, it's not just permission to share now, but it's actually like do share now because it's more useful now than it will be in 2 years.
Such a great point. Such a great point.
Like I suck now. If you get me to teach you how to set up your email marketing stuff, I'm going to be so impatient and it's just not the time anymore. So I've just learned that the hard way because I was like, oh, I could teach someone how to do that. And then I was like, nope, I've gone past the point where I could actually do that. So no, that ship sailed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can speak for that myself. Like the people that I enjoy learning from a lot of times are just the people who are, like you said, 2 or 3 years ahead of me or steps ahead of me versus like Amy Porterfield. And I just feel so out of touch and far away from that. So that is such a great point. The type 6 moving along is the Loyalist or the Troubleshooter. And they have the superpower to take complex information, huge amounts of data and content, and distill it down into bite-sized pieces. So like, what a gift as a podcast host, if you're teaching to be able to do that. Now, the thing that they will sometimes get stuck on is the very opposite of that. Sometimes when they're overwhelmed or kind of in that stress state, what will happen is that they will feel like they need to share all the information. And because they know so much that they're reading all this data, they're taking in all these points, right? That they feel like, oh my gosh, my people need all of it. And it's just overwhelming. So be cautious of that as a 6, that you're really stepping into those strengths and not necessarily overwhelming them with that garden hose of information. And then our type 7 is known as the enthusiast or the multitasker. They are the visionaries on the Enneagram. They have a lot of charm. They have a lot of excitement. They appreciate intellectually like stimulating conversations and topics. And so they're going to really excel too at seeing things and being able to find unexpected connections between those things. So that podcast is going to be kind of like thought leaderish as well, taking new approaches to things, seeing things in a different light. Now, the block for this type is going to be following through. You're going to have 20 ideas. And I don't know if you have any clients like this, Jess, but they're going to have 20 ideas, or they're going to be really excited about starting a podcast. But then the work for the 7 is going to be focusing on that commitment and that follow through before you jump ship or jump onto the next idea.
I was going to say, if anything, that is also a part of me, and a very strong one, where I have so many ideas and I want to do all of them. So I had to hire support to make half of them happen, because I'm also not, I don't know, that level of focus I don't have. So as much as the 1 sounds very familiar to me, and the 4 certainly does, the 7 does too. So I can see where you're saying that so many things are part of us, because I'm right in the trenches with anyone that says I don't have the commitment, or I think it's a good idea and then I think something else is a good idea. I can recommend an idea notebook. I have like a selection down here. So all of your ideas, they're really good and they're really valid. Write them down. But if they don't fit on your 90-day plan and they're not going to get you towards the goal on the plan that you have, like, park it. It's a great idea for in a few weeks when it fits.
Yes.
Like, that's helped me not to feel like I'm letting go of my amazing idea that I just had. That really is absolutely amazing. It's just not right now. I'm like, this is not the moment for this amazing idea. But yeah, I used to feel so guilty when I didn't do it. And now I park it. And now I know I can come back to it anytime I want.
That's so true. With type 7s, I hear a lot of times that they have just a lot of anxiety and a lot of guilt because they're not acting on these ideas. It's like they don't know where to start. And so I love the idea of like an idea parking lot, or like an idea vault of some sort. That's so good. And something else, this is more advanced down the road, but just because you brought it up, Jess, I wanted to touch on it for you specifically, is that there's this theory on the Enneagram that you'll have your dominant type, and then that there's 2 other types on the Enneagram that you most resonate with in the different centers of intelligence. So 8, 9, 1s are in the body center. There are 2, 3s, 4s in the feeling center, where they make feelings from their heart first. And then there are 5, 6, 7s in the head or thinking triad. And so for you, the 3 numbers, or the 2 other numbers that go with the 4, is a 1 and a 7. So when you're in your head, you're most thinking like a 7. And when you're thinking kind of with that gut instinct, you're most thinking like a 1 as that dominant type 4 potentially. So that's just really interesting. Another angle of just kind of how is so complex, because we're complex.
Yeah, it's complex, but it makes sense still.
Yeah, it feels really good. Well, and for me, so I most identify as a type 7. And so the theory goes like, when I'm in my feelings, I'm feeling like a 4, which means 4s tend to be more introspective versus a 2 who tend to like focus on other feelings. And so when I am in my feelings, I am a little bit more self-centered and thinking about like my own feelings, which is so true. And I was like, okay, yes, that's
yeah,
me.
I'm totally terrible. I'm like, oh, I'm just not like feeling good today. And I was having a whole moment. There's like earlier, I was like, oh, it's Sunday, and I'm just like, I have no energy, and it's gonna be that time of the month, and I'm like, I just don't want to do anything. And it's just like, I just have those. We just let them go.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. So again, it's just is like, oh my gosh, this is a thing that I do. And just like, before you can make any changes, and sometimes you don't have to make a change, but it's just like owning it and be like, yeah, I'm not going to feel guilty about this anymore. This is just something I do sometimes. Okay. Do you want me to, we have 2 more left.
Yeah. The 8.
I'll knock
next,
this out.
Right?
Yeah. So type 8 is known as the challenger or the protector. They have this, their strength is their strength. So they are very focused on always having the power and the strength so that nobody else can take advantage of them. And also so that nobody else can take advantage of the people that they most care about. And so they might be starting a podcast and wanting to share their message because they feel very passionate about an injustice in the world, or in the industry, or their local community, whatever it might be. And they want to bring light to that. And they're going to bring direct communication to that issue. They are going to bring passion to that issue and expose those injustices with this message or by starting their podcast. And then on the flip side of that is that just like we're doing here, and you've opened up about your own self, having that vulnerable, relatable experience can be so helpful and really connecting and building that know, like, and trust. But for 8s, their greatest fear is being weak, showing vulnerability at anything. And so the work for them will be to, at some point along their show and their message, to share little bits and pieces. You don't have to be, raw and vulnerable, but open up enough so that people can feel like they know you, that they can connect to you in some way. And then lastly, the type 9 is known as the Peacemaker or the Mediator. Their superpower is being very inclusive. They're able to sit with the gray, in the gray, versus our type 1s who are more like black and white, right or wrong, this or that. 9s are totally okay with not knowing the answer, being able to see multiple perspectives. So for them, a show where they're bringing on different perspectives and learning, interviewing or just talking about issues, and maybe not even having to take a stand, but just bringing the information and letting the audience make their own decision could be a great way to have a show as a type 9 where you have that superpower. The thing with the type 9, though, sometimes is that they are so focused on peace and harmony and not getting into any conflict or having conflict in their life, is that they will numb out, repress their own thoughts and feelings and opinions because it might rock the boat. They want to go with the flow more than anything. And so sometimes what might keep them from getting visible or starting a podcast is they might be thinking, well, I don't even know what I think. I don't know what I believe, because they've shoved it down and numbed it out so much. So because they don't want it to cause conflict, right? But nobody's ever going to agree with every single thing that we say. So just understanding, and kind of that would be the work around for the 9 to be able to start getting more visible and claiming their power as the podcast host or the messenger of that mission or message.
Super interesting. And what I can't believe, on the note of how interesting it is, every time something is super interesting, I could still sit here in 2 hours to be learning about this. I can't believe that we've actually already talked about this for 45 minutes, which is insane. But I have a couple of more things that I totally want to ask about. So if you're not in a rush, then I will go ahead and ask. I saw this quote on your website that I loved. And it was that one of the top reasons we're not happy is trying to be, do, or have something we don't really want. And I think, coming back to the shoulds, that is something that there's just so much of at the moment. As a woman, you should want to have children. You should be you're naturally good at parenting. You should. There's all these shoulds in your role, and then in your work, you should. And how can we use the Enneagram to help us to create more happiness in our lives?
I love this question. And the Enneagram allows us to kind of put to bed those shoulds, because it shines the light on the things that we actually want. And so it's starting to understand that and see that. So for example, for me, I'll just speak for myself. I really like options. I like variety. I like freedom. Yep. And so saying like, I should be more structured. I should be able to sit down and work for 8 or 10 hours at my desk. I should be able to set up this email sequence and do this thing and do this thing. Or I should want this job that is over 6 figures, right? And then it's like, well, when I realize what's really important to me, it's the ability to travel, to have experiences. 7s are the collector of experiences. It's like, then I can say, okay, maybe I'm willing to exchange. I'm not saying you can't have both. I do believe that you can have both, but it's like, if I had to choose, like I'm working myself to the bone so that I can say that I make 6 figures, or I'm able to make a decent amount and still have like extra to travel. And I'm not all the time working. I'm okay with sometimes working 4 hours a day. And so it's just like not putting that pressure on yourself and being able to set up your life in a way that matches the things that you actually want to do, not the things that you feel like you should do. Does that answer the question?
It does. I think it's something I didn't spend by far enough time thinking about in my 20s. And this is something that I guess you're not encouraged to think about it. Nobody asks you in school, how would you like to learn? How would you like to access this educational content we provided for you? I would have said, I would like to be at home or with 2 or 3 of my friends, and I would like to learn what I like to learn about. Like I worked in a Montessori daycare for a while, and I absolutely loved it because all the children get to work on the things that they're interested in, and everything else gets fed through their interest. So it was highly unique. They were mostly working by themselves or in small groups that they picked, and it worked so differently, and it was so peaceful, and I never had any problems. It wasn't this whole like large scale group management of like entertaining 25 2-year-olds because you have to enforce them sitting down for way too long and stuff like that. So I think it's just not that individualism we don't have. So nobody taught me to like think about what do you want. And then I watched, what's that movie where they're arguing, the couple, they buy the car, and he goes, oh, I'm not asking you about what your mom wants or what somebody else wants. Like, what do you want? And I can't remember which one it was. Oh, but it's like, I'll drop it in the show notes if I remember. But
I bet you have some listeners that are like, it's this
it's this one. And I'm like, I hate it. I can never think of these titles. And then I'm like, no. But yeah, they're like totally arguing. And then she's like, oh yeah, I guess. And then I thought about it. I was like, yeah, what do you want? And I was like, I don't know what I want. This was like a disastrous moment. I'm like, I don't know what I want. Like, this is a thing. But yeah, who encourages you? Nobody. So this is like my biggest thing that I wish I'd spend more time thinking about, because then maybe I would have done more to move things in that direction, which I'm kind of doing now. So that's nice, but it could have been done sooner had I just had somebody told me about this.
That's a great point, that it's not something that it's just like, oh, well, let me think about it for like 10 minutes or the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you want is something that you like are always reflecting on, and it's probably always changing and adding to it a little bit, but it is something to like constantly be checking in with yourself on. And, I was even thinking about, just as you were talking, like how to apply this to podcasting. And I don't know what you share or teach on this, but somebody might come to you or be thinking like, oh, I have to start a podcast, and the episodes have to be released every week, and it has to have an intro, and it has to have music, and I'm overwhelmed with all the tech. And it's, again, just thinking like, well, what's important to you? Is it just having these like meaningful conversations? Then like, could you have a podcast without an intro music at first to get started? Yes, it doesn't have to be perfect. Or could you do a podcast that's released once a month or twice a month? Or, it's just even thinking about something like as tangible as like starting a podcast, or the topics this could be applied to, and doing it in a way that feels good and aligned with your personality, your motives, and not necessarily like what you see other people doing. That has probably worked really well for other people because they're different than you are.
Yeah, that's what I say like all the time. It's basically every single episode. I'm like, well, you can do this or you cannot do it. At the end of the day, guess what? The guru type person will tell you that their way is the only way to do it. And I will tell you that your way is the only way to do it. So whatever is right for you is whatever feels, right for you, and whatever gets you results. And if you feel like a disgusting sleazeball because of the way that you're doing your podcast, then maybe this method isn't working so well for you. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the method. It's just wrong person with this method. So just like I say, I also don't say you need to have a podcast. No, you don't need to have a podcast. You can do something else if you don't like recording this kind of stuff. So then don't do it. Like, stop doing shit you don't like.
Yes.
That's kind of, I keep telling myself that too. I'm like, I don't like writing. And then I find myself writing for ages. And I'm like, can we stop doing shit that I don't like? Like, I record this like every single week. Actually, they're coming out like twice a week. So there's going to be plenty of content that doesn't need to be written down. So like, I just cut so much stuff out, and I wish I'd thrown out way more, way sooner, like all the stuff that I don't really want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what about you? What made you think about podcasting?
Well, it's something that I really enjoy. I'm like you. I kept hearing about like Pinterest and like blogging and like people's business blowing up because they were making graphics on Pinterest and direct them to their website. It wasn't working
for me.
It was, I was like, I just, like you said, like, I'm like, I just don't love to write that much, but there are some people that do. So like, I'm not saying anything against that. that ideal. But what I love to do is to, again, knowing that like experiences and hearing other people's experiences and hearing about all the possibilities in the world is something that is totally aligns with my personality. And so having an interview style podcast was a good fit when I thought about what I enjoy and then how I like to communicate. I'm very much a verbal processor. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the type, but just like as you start to reflect, like, am I a writing person? Am I a audio person? Am I a video person? And so just kind of putting all those things together. I like networking. I like connecting with others. And so it just allowed me to I found that it gave me energy. It's not something that drains me. I'm not overwhelmed by the tech because I just try and just keep it as simple. And my goal isn't to have like a top 10 podcast.
No.
I hope that's okay to say. Okay.
Yeah, no, mine's not. I want to share knowledge in a method that works for me. And that's why I went with this, because I keep saying that I have too many bad hair days for YouTube. So I just, I don't have to go on video. So this is like the next best thing. When I've got my antennas out, I don't want to have to first spend half an hour trying to get my hair under control. So I gave up.
Oh, that's so good. I have too many bad hair days for YouTube. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, for me, I have also found that I've added in a solo episode, a shorter solo episode each week recently too. And that has helped me kind of flush out what I want to say, what I want to talk about. It gives me new ideas. And then I'm using that content to put into workshops. I would like to get more into public speaking and get paid for public speaking. And so having a podcast is a way to, I feel like, get myself out there, show that I'm, able to speak form sentences, and then also help me flush out things. So maybe that episode isn't like the best episode I could have ever put out, but I won't know necessarily how to talk about that topic if I don't talk about that topic. You know what I mean? So it helps me say, I might go back and be like, gosh, I wish I would have added in this, or I wish I would have said this differently, but I wouldn't have known that had I not said it. And then I'll just know for if I ever cover that topic again in a different way, or if now when I speak, when I share it in a presentation, I'm going to tweak it a little bit. So it's really been helpful in developing my voice and my message as well.
I think that's really important. I did an episode, I'm not sure which one it is. Hang on, I'll find it so that I can send people to the right one. Yeah, episode 11, season 1. I talked about structuring the show, but it wasn't, the whole point is that the content as a whole needs to make sense. But then also each episode, it's like if you have a bus line that runs from stop A to stop C via stop B, and there's people at stop A, but you're starting the bus route at stop B, the people can't get on the bus. The thing that I find is that sometimes goes missing is that there's people who have a lower level of knowledge about that subject at this point, and you expect people to be a bit further ahead, so you can't help them to get on the wagon, and now they're missing the message. So that's something that I found really useful, is to think about who's listening, where are they at right now, where do I want them to get to, and what do they need to hear. And I do plan, I don't completely write out all of the episodes, but I do plan the solo episodes. So I'm like, right, they know this right now. I want them to get to this point, and this is what they need to know to get there. And I agree with you, though, that sometimes the example that I might use isn't the best one that I could have used in that moment, but I also wouldn't know until I've used it. And then I listen back to it and I'm like, yeah, this didn't make 100% sense. It's like at 80% of, yep, this is the right thing to say, but it's a practice. And if we don't do it, then we're not gonna get any better.
Exactly. Yeah. The only way to get better at speaking is to speak. The only way to get better at writing is to write, whatever it is. And that it's like no amount of like studying or reading or taking a course on how to do it at some point. And this is like something I have to tell myself a lot. Is just like, okay, you have, obviously, I don't know, the listeners can't see this, but I have like so many books behind me. And sometimes I use those as like ways to procrastinate. It's like, oh, well, I'm sure there's something in this book that like I'm missing and that I need in order to start a podcast or to put out my offer or to pivot in a business. And so let me just see what that is. And then I'll just read and study. And there is a place for that. But at some point, like you're saying, you just have to say it. You just have to do it. Otherwise you won't know. You know, a lot of times people are like looking for their purpose or like, what's my passion? It's like no amount of thinking will ever lead you to that answer. It's one, I don't even believe that you find it's something that you find. I think it's something that you create, but you won't ever be able to create it without taking action and like crossing off things that you don't like, or that, you know, how do you even know what you like? So one, you might be at step 1, but your thing that you're going to find is at step 5. But like you were saying with the bus routes, you can't get there from 0 to 5. You have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that involves trying and action and improving and crossing things out and redoing things. But you won't ever get there if you don't start.
I agree so much with that. The amount of things that never became a thing because the person never started. You know, that hurts. Or because you give up, because you're like this, you know, this tiny step away from the goal. And then people are like, yep, no, this is not working. I'm going to give up. And one of the things my boyfriend said about me was that I have this thing, like I'll keep butting my head against the wall until I find a spot in the wall that turn into a hole kind of thing. Like I'm not the give upper kind of person. I just understand that the approach isn't working. It was hard learned that isn't a reflection on myself or on the thing that I'm selling or on the whatever. It is just whatever approach or message or insert whatever the thing is I'm using, it is not working in the way that I'd intended it to work. And I think that's something that can hold you back when you think, oh, it's personal, or it's the thing that I'm doing that's nobody wants it, or it's too expensive. You know, I have to like slash the price in half so I don't earn anything from it. All of these things are not true. It's just maybe the wrong timing or the wrong people for the thing that you're selling. You know, so many reasons that are nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Did you ever get a top tip from someone along the way and on the podcasting journey or even in the business journey as a whole that's really stuck with you? That's maybe even become like a little bit of a mantra or anything?
Well, and I don't know if this counts. I had written down something else, but something just came to mind is, so I listened to an interview with Ed Sheeran. And he was talking about how he had lived with Jamie Foxx when he started his career, when he was getting his career started. And sometimes Jamie Foxx, I guess, lets new up and coming artists sleep on his couch. And he had taken Ed Sheeran to a nightclub and ended up like exploding after that. And it was all great. And, you know, he is where he is now. And in the interview, the host asked him, wow, you know, I'm sure that like, there's very much like that starving artist mentality. I'm sure lots of artists have been sleeping on people's couches. And like, you know, I'm sure, you know, a lot of people who didn't make it. Like, what was the thing that like why did you make it? And he said something that I was not expecting. And he said, well, actually, everybody that I know who's ever like really wanted it has made it. They may be 50 years old, but they have made it. And so he was just kind of talking about like that idea of like not giving up and finding different ways to do it. Kind of like that whole like burning the ships concept, where he was like, the people that didn't make it were the people who had a plan B. And so for me, I think about that a lot when, you know, because I will be honest, like there are days, there are times, especially last year, running my own business, and half my clients at the time, you know, were not open. And so they were not marketing. And so, you know, thinking about, well, am I going to have to go back and get a job? Am I going to have to go back and sit in a cubicle? And so I think about that, and it's like, no, I don't want to have a plan B. Maybe I need to switch up my approach or pivot a little bit, but it's not giving up. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was something that always like has stuck with me. Was the Ed and Jamie Foxx story.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. And it's okay to make it, you know, in quotation marks, later on. You know, it might take longer because life just kind of happens. And that's why, you need to invest that extra bit of time. But yeah, that doesn't mean that it's failing.
I just watched The Founder again with my boyfriend 2 nights ago, the Ray Kroc story about McDonald's. And he was like 52 or 53. And he was just like this struggling salesman, always had like a gadget that he was selling. His wife was frustrated. He was losing his house. And like at 50 plus years old, he started working on the concept of McDonald's. And like, obviously we know how that turned out. So like those kinds of stories are very inspiring, because I do think that there is like this culture of like, oh, we need to find out like what we want to do and like make it in our 20s. Or we need to like be married by the time we're 30, or we need to do this in order to be happy by this age. There's a lot of like, I don't know, like pre-planned for us, like milestones. And it's like, just questioning those. And then by focusing on like how we haven't met some milestone that like, we don't even know who created that milestone. Like, why is that even a thing? We make that a thing. And then we hold ourselves up against that thing and think, oh my gosh, I'm a failure because I haven't found the love of my life yet. I haven't had a baby yet. I haven't started my business yet. I haven't had 6 figures yet. And so I haven't made $1 million yet or whatever. And it's like, well, I'm probably not going to. I guess this means I'm not going to. I guess this means I'm failing at life. And it's like, oh my gosh, we miss out on so much rather than just allowing, all we can do is control the intention that we set and then the action that we take towards that intention. And then where that leads us could be even better than we have planned. But, life, not to get like too cheesy, but it is like we miss out on what's right in front of us, the people right in front of us, the client right in front of us, the joy, just, sitting outside for a moment, because we're so focused on like, quote unquote, like you were saying, making it, and then getting frustrated. And that's such a joy stealer. That's such a happiness stealer. And so, and really, again, I'm talking to myself here, is just to remember that it is just like the journey. That's cliche, but it very much is. And I think that applies to like a podcast journey, like getting started. Just enjoy the beginning. Like think about how much you're probably going to like laugh and just how like endearing it's going to be to go back after your 100th episode and listen to your first one. But you won't ever get there if you don't start, but just, enjoy those experiences, enjoy that growing.
Yeah. As much as it's uncomfortable at times, but even the uncomfortable is enjoyable actually, if you pay attention to it, because it's like a learning experience waiting to happen. You can do things so many times, you're still picking up new stuff every single time that you do it. I still learn things every single day, although I've been working for myself for like 6 years. That doesn't matter that I know everything there is to know. I just know how much I don't know at this point. So every day there's going to be something additional that comes up that I didn't know about a person, a technique, a tool, a this or that, every single day.
Yes.
And that's the fun part. That's why I think, wasn't it this whole thing of like the gold medal depression where athletes end up, miserable?
Yes. Oh,
So,
that's a good one. Yeah.
I have one last question. Where can people find out more about you?
I am over at sarahlynnco.com. And then I actually have a resource for your listeners that are interested in learning more about the Enneagram, trying to narrow down their type. And that's sarahlynnco.com/pristine. And so I'll send you that link. There's a guide there that kind of breaks down the different types and helps you start to kind of narrow it down. And you can use that to accompany a quiz that you take and kind of start to learn more about those. And then I also have a podcast called the Enneagram MBA Podcast, where we do interviews, learning about people's specific experiences as that type, because it's so much more than just what the textbooks say. And then also getting tips for how to get your idea out to the world, how to become more visible in different ways from different experts.
Cool. That's super interesting. I will link all of that up in the show notes, as well as I do every single time. And then I'm going to end up binge listening to the podcast in the next few days, knowing myself. I'll be like, right, let me listen to all of this. Awesome. That was a really good chat. Thank you so much for taking the time and for breaking down all the types for us podcasters so that we can really understand how we can, I guess, move our life and our podcast and our businesses ahead in a way that feels right and authentic to all of us, which I think is really important. So thank you. Thanks for taking that time, and thanks for explaining it so well.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a really fun conversation.
You're welcome.
That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you. If you're ready to step out of overwhelm, then don't forget to check out the podcast workflow blueprint at pristinepodcast.com/blueprint. The link is also in the show notes.